Well, welcome everybody. Steve Cady here with our Change 2024 Think Tank series. We have our Think Tankers, as we can affectionately call our two guests here today. We have Don Warrick and John Scherer, and they are beyond what I would call a wealth of knowledge. They are connected to the essence and history of the field of OD&C. They have had amazing conversations with people. They've done work with people that have been at the beginning and the origins of the field. We can hear straight from them some just great perspectives. Both Don and John. John is in Poland at the moment. Does a lot of work in Europe, and Poland is one of his favorite places on the planet, and he does great work there, and he has a real perspective on global OD. And Don is in Colorado, and Don is our Lifetime Achievement Award winner at the with OD Network, and I believe AOM as well. And same with John, recognized for his lifetime of work and contributions to the field. It's really a pleasure to have both of you here. I'm just super grateful for this today. In the room with us, we have people from all around the country and world, oftentimes coming in to learn more about the field. The series that we're embarking on is a part of our Doctorate in Organization Development Change program, the All Things Change podcast webinar series. That's a part of the Nexus for Change organization. And we have some great students, and the work that they're doing is truly inspiring. And our program is for working adults. It's people who seek to advance their thought leadership in service of doing human-centered change in transforming organizations, revitalizing community, and developing human potential, solving real-world problems, bringing evidence to those challenges, and sharing what they learn with others to help creating a ripple effect in the world, and helping people help people help people, I think, is the business that we're in. I oftentimes think of our students in the program as ripplers, if you will. And we have people here from both the doctorate program, the master's program, as well as partners, guests, people like Dave Fearon, who's been a great partner with us, Carol, who teaches in our program. We just have a wonderful group of people. I'd like to say especially thank you, Lisa. Thanks. Lisa's our producer for the program, and also Heather Ritson, who is here. She has been helping with coordination and really helping us to get this together. So both between the two of you, thank you so much for your time to help us make sure this is a well-run event. And we have people coming in still. It's great people jumping in. So again, welcome everybody as you arrive. And I don't want to take any more time. The stories you all have to share are so intriguing. The origins, the essence. What is this field about? Where does it come from? How is it looked at on a global stage? Because OD&C is not just for one hemisphere of the globe. It is truly a globally developed field in many ways. So with that, what we're going to do is we're going to begin with Don. Don's going to share. He's just written a chapter that goes in the Practicing OD book. This is the book here. I now have the honor of being a co-editor and author for the next edition, the 5th edition. It's called Practicing Organization Development and Change. It's with Bill Rothwell and Jackie Stavros. And we have lots of leading thinkers in this book, and two of them being John and Don. And Don has written a couple. One that he's going to focus on today is really looking at how we think about the field, and his chapter, and how we look at the field of OD&C and competencies, and just generally how people think about it. And so that chapter is going to be posted you're going to get to see a early release draft of that. And so you'll see that in the chat. So that'll be put in. And then John wrote one on the origins of the field, and you'll be able to see an early version of that. And then Dave Fearon, our beloved practicing OD author, has a book that's on my library, and we'll put a link in there for you to his work. Those of you in there here also know Carol Gorlick. We could put Carol's chapter in if we can, Lisa. If you could put Carol's chapter in that she did with Billy with Barbara Bunker on the history of the field of OD. You could drop that link in. And other people here have great content, so I don't want to miss anybody. I'm looking across. I think I've touched on all the different people that have things to share that you all love to put in your library. So again, being a part of this, you also get your library shared with you. So Don is going to share a summary of his work, and then there's Dave Jameson. That's great to see Dave. Dave will be featured as well, and so if we have content for Dave that we can share, he's got it's a lot of content, so we want to put that in the chat as well. So hi, Dave. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. And Dave will be in one of our series. So Don will go first. John will go second. And then what we'll do is we'll put you in a breakout room to talk about what did you hear, what your reactions are, what questions you have. We'll then bring you back for a lively conversation around what questions you all have. After today, we will, for the next Thursday, every week at 11 a.m., have think tankers, our thought leaders, coming in to share with you all their leading edge thoughts, what they're most inspired about right now, things that they want to share with you. And let me tell you, it will be worth every minute for every one of the sessions. And we put out a call to all the thought leaders that are connected to the Collaborative Change Handbook, the Practicing OD book, to Bowling Green State University. And we had so many people generously willing to show up. We're scheduled all the way into January with think tank sessions. And so it's really, really an honor to have you both here today, Don and John. So Don, what we'll do is I'll turn it over to you. If you have slides you want to share, you can pull that up, and we'll start with you, and then we'll move over to John. So Don, how would you like to start?
Well, maybe by just saying I love the field of organization development, which, by the way, was changed in 1989 by the Academy of Management to be called Organization Development and Change. So you can use either term, but it's just a great, honorable, exciting, relevant field to be in. It's the course for the times. A lot of people don't realize that this field is the only field that was designed purely to build healthy, effective organizations. Those terms came, by the way, from Richard Beckard, who probably had the most popular definition of OD. And those were always the target, to improve the health and the effectiveness of organizations. So you've got the people side and the performance side. And even that emphasis is a new way of thinking about organizations. And all of you know it's greatly needed today. If you're effective, but you don't have a very healthy organization, eventually it's going to cost you. And so we're trying to get across that great balance of how to build organizations, teams, any kind of a group, so that it not only gets great results, but it's a great place to work. Now, in regards to what I'm going to share today, in the early editions of this wonderful book, by the way, Practicing OD, I was asked to survey leaders in the field, and then eventually just the authors that are in this book, about current thinking in OD. So my original chapter actually was the leaders in the field, and asking just the basic questions about what is OD, what are the characteristics, values, and so on. And probably one of the most fun things I ever did. It literally put me in contact with Richard Beckard, with Edgar Schein, Robert Tannenbaum, Gordon Lippett, Robert Blake, Jane Mouton, all these leaders, the founders in the field. So I have continued this process through the Practicing OD book, each new edition with new questions about what's going on in the field, and have added then many other leaders like Tom Cumming and Chris Worley and Kathleen Dana Miller and Jean Bartunek, so many others that are leaders in the field. So it's just been a fun exercise for me. So this latest one is called Current Skills in Practicing OD. So this is really interesting to me. I hope to you as well, because this is what's going on in the field today. And so now what we're doing with this exercise is we're actually surveying the authors that are in the book. And they range from founding practitioners to people that are academicians that are doing great work in consulting and so on. So it's the leading thinkers on the field of OD. So I asked them 6 questions this time about current practices. So I will briefly go through those 6 questions and what their responses were. Again, you can find it on this chapter. And by the way, you're the first ones to hear this. This is literally live and in living color today, because no one's even seen this chapter other than the editors, because it hasn't been published yet. So here's the first question. What are the potential benefits? And I'll just use the word OD instead of ODC, just so I'll be consistent with the book title, Practicing OD. The potential benefits of OD in today's times. So you sure want to get this chapter, because it's good for you and I in being able to propose OD to organizations, because we can talk about the payoff. So here's the first one, and you may not have thought about this. It develops transformed leaders. Notice I didn't say transformational, and that would be good as well, but transformed leaders. Basically, we teach leaders how to think and act in very different ways than they traditionally do. We teach them how to build these healthy, high-performance organizations. Secondly, it improves organization, individual, team performance. The original definitions of OD were all focused on whole organizations, but eventually the field evolved where we really target not just the whole organization, which, by the way, you rarely get an opportunity to do, but we focus on teams, individuals, culture, and so on. And by the way, that's the next one. We're the early ones that focused on culture. With all the research about culture now that links performance and the health of the organization, now there's a real interest in culture. What a lot of people don't realize, this was in the original thinking of OD. It was all about improving and changing cultures that we could build where people can thrive. Now this is becoming a critical factor. I've been doing a lot of work recently with Alan Mulally. I don't know if you know the name, but he was the former CEO of Ford. And he's the one that transformed Ford, mostly by changing their culture. So I've really been focused a lot on culture lately. Here's another term, transformative communications. I don't think a lot of people, even in the field, realize how much we impact communications in organizations where we involve people. We have all kinds of ways of gathering data and feeding it back. And we get people to talk to each other so that when we do a change or whatever, we link top level people with bottom level people. We emphasize open and safe communications. We've had a huge impact on communications. We empower and engage and involve people in helping organizations improve, sometimes be transformed, become more effective. And of course, this was in the early roots of OD, where we focused on a collaborative approach to the field. And that's a huge contribution. It's very rare in organizations where top level people actually are listening to people before they make changes. And so to actually involve people at all levels of the organization is quite unique. Certainly the emphasis by the terminology of OD on continuous development and improvement, the focus on learning to effectively manage change. And you've heard the statistics, some question them, but actually there's quite a bit of substantiation of the fact that it's somewhere around 70% or more of organization changes fail, or at least fail to achieve the desired objective. That has a terrible impact on an organization and really could even lead to their demise. but we're experts in that, of how to manage change effectively. And according to Robert Golumbewski, increase the effectiveness or the success rate to 70% or more success, not failure. Developing high performing teams and teamwork, making valuable contributions to society. You know, OD has gone way beyond just typical organizations. Now we do things to improve countries, societies, and so on. And here's another one that's really important. We've influenced taking a systems approach to changes and decisions. Now think about that, so that we get leaders to think about, if you're going to make this major change, here's what the far-reaching implications are on culture, on people, performance, on our stakeholders. And that's a whole new way of thinking for leaders. And then to align all the policies and practices and values and mission and so on with what we're actually trying to achieve. So here's number two. What are some changes in the practice of OD? Now, you're all being impacted by this. And number one, of course, would be the use of virtual processes. We as OD people don't travel as much. We unfortunately don't get to be quite as engaged with people as we were in the past, because so much of it is virtual. The good news is we can do about anything, anywhere in the world virtually. But it changes the way you practice your profession. And certainly greater use of technology and AI. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm just struggling to keep even halfway up with all the technological things that we can do in OD. Awareness and use of concepts that have been involved in OD. In other words, we used to be pretty much focused on action research. Now we've got appreciative inquiry, we've got dialogic OD, we've got positive OD. In other words, there's a lot of new thinking about how we approach the field. Pressures to accelerate the OD process. You know, we always have been taught to think of long-term change. You can't change things overnight. You better now. You don't have the luxury of long-term change. So that makes you think about your approach to working with organizations in a very different kind of way. Abundance of people practicing OD who really don't understand OD. So here's what's happened to our field. You know, people wonder why we haven't caught on more, and partially it's because it's gotten so splintered. In other words, people have picked up parts of our field, like let's say change management, building teams or whatever. And so they focus on that aspect of OD. But by doing that, they compromise our whole purpose, which is to look at things from a big picture perspective and how they all work together. So they change pieces, but then they forget about many parts that should be involved. Certainly the greater emphasis on culture, focusing on teaching people how to manage change. The term well-being is now very popular, which really fits our description of health. And then finally, and John probably would be the expert to speak on this, is a greater emphasis on international OD and growth in OD outside North America. And in fact, the field seems to be growing much faster outside of the US. Here's number three, personal changes that authors in the book have actually made. So this is what's going on. What are authors actually doing about it? You know, the people have been practicing OD for quite some time. And of course, there's the updating technologically, learning to use virtual meetings and all that sort of thing. But really what I found was most of the practitioners haven't made dramatic changes. They've more refined probably what they already do. In other words, finding ways to do it better. And just so you'll know, there's always this tendency when you introduce something that's perhaps a newer, better way to do things, to then dismiss what's happened in the past. In other words, and we've seen a lot of that in OD. Action research is old-fashioned. It's all about just fixing things. It's not about being progressive and thinking for the future. By the way, I don't buy that. I think the best practitioners always focus not just on what's wrong and how we fix it. We always focused on what's possible, what's new that we need to be doing better. So frankly, I think that's all been around forever, but that seems to be the way you introduce a new concept. You dismiss the old and say, now this is the new way to do things. But in reality, we're practicing both, the old and new, and don't dismiss wonderful principles that were developed in this field. They're not old-fashioned. Most of the principles are still pretty sound. Next question. What are the concepts that are most being used in OD today? And I would say probably action research is still the most popular, but close by now would be appreciative inquiry, dialogic OD, and certainly more positive approaches to OD. And of course, the risk of all that, in general, there's a much more positive focus, is that you overlook things that do need attention. You can be so positive that you're also blinded by some things. But certainly it makes sense if you can approach things in a more positive way. People are more likely to get involved, interested, and so on. So then the next question, this is really an important lessons that were learned about managing change. Now, everybody knows we're in times of dynamic, accelerated, nonstop, unpredictable kind of change. And so what have we learned about that? And one thing that I found with the authors is this is an area of, I would say, misunderstanding and miscommunication, even with the leaders in the field. In other words, originally, we developed some great terms like planned change, managing change. Well, a lot of the newer thinkers dismiss all that. Now it's all about generative change, leading change, not managing. And there's a lot of quibbling about terms, but it's really still about managing change, or whatever you want to call it. We're looking at change and how we can get better at it. So again, I would caution you to not dismiss all the old thinking and terms. By the way, I don't care what approach you use, appreciative inquiry, dialogic, OD, or whatever, still requires a lot of planning. So when they dismiss terms like planned change, you may be planning your approach in a different way, but it's still planning. What's the term if you don't plan, you plan to fail, or something like that? Anyway, here's some things that we learned, though. Certainly, it's critical to involve, engage, and listen to the appropriate people before you make changes. And we all are familiar and probably have experienced that the typical approach to change is the people at the top see all, know all, feel all. At least they think they do, and so they initiate changes. And they're not based on any kind of assessment, talking to people impacted by the changes. And so they look good and feel good to them and probably make no sense to the people who have to carry them out. And so we've learned, we're learning, we haven't really learned, we're learning to involve and engage people and listen to them, so that if we're going to make changes, they're going to make sense. And there's a buy-in to doing it. Certainly, this whole idea of effective communications and creating a safe environment for involvement and engagement. I've written quite a bit lately about resistance to change, and finding out maybe that resistance is not so bad. Sometimes the resistors are the heroes, not the villains. they have things to say that we needed to listen to. You know, maybe it was a bad change to begin with. Maybe there's a better way to do it. But the only way that you're going to hear from the people you need to hear from is to create opportunities for people to be involved. So even if by the way, you happen to be a good leader, and I don't think there are a lot of these around that literally create a safe and open culture for people to share ideas and tell the truth and to be candid. But that's really not enough, because even if you're good at that, people still may not have opportunities to share their ideas, get involved, and so on. So what I'm saying is you not only have to create a safe culture, you have to create opportunities for people to be able to communicate, share ideas, be candid, whether it's in open kind of things or whether it's surveying people or whatever. But you need to create those opportunities. And I'll just tell you a personal concern, and some wrote about this, that there are a lot of factors happening today that actually work against that are so-called well-intended factors, but may be causing an opposite effect. And I don't hope I don't offend anybody, but even things like DEI and all these government requirements we have, where you have to be careful what you say, you can't offend anybody, they actually work against openness. And so I've talked to Amy Edmondson about this from Harvard, who wrote the book about psychological safety. And she said this is a real problem today, that there are a lot of things working against openness and being candid and so on. Another thing is training leaders at all levels on how to manage change. Again, use whatever term you like, but my gosh, you can make a huge difference just by training people at the top and throughout the organization in just the fundamental principles of managing change. One of the things I do with organizations is help them create some principles for managing change that are used throughout the organization. They're not forced, but they're guidelines that people use when they think about changes. It's very important to build a change-ready culture. You know, you can do all kinds of wonderful things, but if it's in conflict with the culture, it's probably not going to work. We can tell people if you're going to do change right, you got to involve and engage people, got to have safe, open communications. But if the culture doesn't value that and you don't address that and change it, it's probably going to undermine most of the efforts that you make. Certainly, we need to think of change as not linear, but it can change itself all the time. And so we have to have continuous ways of monitoring the change process. In other words, however you approach change, you know, whether it's action research or dialogical D or whatever, you have to build in ways to get feedback on what's working and not working. Otherwise, changes can go on sometimes for years, where the people at the top are being told they're working great and they're not working at all. And so with all the dynamics going on when we make changes, we do have to be really good at monitoring it so we know what's working and not working. Here's another one. Change, and I know you all can identify with this. I certainly can in my organization. What does change usually mean to the person in the organization? It means more work. It means doing more with less. We're going to cut your resources, but expect you to do more. In other words, change is usually negative for people. We need to do a much better job of making the incentive to change greater than the incentive to stay the same. And think about it. So what are the payoffs to people? We want them to get involved and engaged. How are they going to benefit from this? And particularly focus in our practices, I believe, on not just adding things, but getting rid of things. In other words, I spend a lot of time with organizations figuring out what to get rid of. You know, what are the meetings, the policies, the practices that we do that are redundant, not needed, and so on. Then just a few more. I'm just about to wrap it. For change to succeed, we really need to think a whole lot more about alignment. and get leaders to think that way. That's that systems thinking. Is this change really consistent with our values? Do we actually reward this kind of behavior? If we're preaching teamwork, but we only reward individual effort, it's going to cancel out what we're trying to do. Just a couple more. We need to emphasize a lot more about sustaining changes and learning from changes. In other words, it's not just about making changes, but how can you sustain it? And I'm sure all of you practitioners have had this happen all the time, where you've made this great change and things are working really well. And you say, now there's one more part to this change process, and that is we got to figure out how to sustain it. And they say, well, geez, we've already made the changes. We don't want to really invest a lot more time and money in sustaining it. I mean, that's really critical. And how often do you actually learn from changes? In the military, for example, this is common practice. In sports, when something goes wrong or we make a change, we try to learn everything we can about it. We almost never do in organizations. How often have you actually been involved in a meeting where you said, okay, we made all this change. What did we learn? Can we pass that on to others? And then finally, of course, the use of more positive approaches. Now, the last thing, I'll just go through these real quick. What are our big challenges in the future? Of course, it's getting people to even understand what our field is and perhaps credentialing people so we know they have some skills. Reaching the people who need OD. I mean, how do we get their attention? Building culture in virtual environments. It's not easy to do. Navigating rapid technological advancements, just time. I don't know about you, but it's really hard to get people together because they're all so busy today. And connected to that is change fatigue. We just add one more change to all the changes they're involved in, and they're just fatigued. Justifying our impact and finding ways to explain to people why it's so important. And then even the politicization of programs, all the government requirements and so on, sometimes can be well-intended, but just create barriers to change. So summary is, it's a great field to be in. I mean, it's an honorable field. We're doing something is so needed, but the field needs to practice what it preaches. In other words, we've got to adapt to change by updating our own methods. So that's it.
Thanks, Don. That's great. And we'll have time at the end for some questions. We have scheduled in plenty of time to have a good Q&A. And you talked a little bit about, some of the origins and how we've evolved. And John, you really have some perspective on that. And the chapter you wrote on the origins of the field do a nice job of really helping us see where we've come from. And it's a very rich history. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and anything else you wish to share that you have prepared for us.
Oh boy, Don, there's so many things you said. I was going, yes. I would just love to be in an extended, love to share over a cup or a glass with you an afternoon or an evening. So let's see what we can do here. Thanks, Steve. Let me share the screen here. See if this is working. Are we on? Right, you got my slides there. Can you see them, Lisa? Okay,
Yep.
Cool. When the editors of the the Practicing OD book asked me to write a chapter with Billy Albin on the origins of OD, I remembered this statement. I think it was from one of the early physicists that said that we're standing on the shoulders of giants with our thinking, and that's how we got that particular title. And I want to say amen, Don. That I was in 1972. I was a Gestalt therapist and a Lutheran pastor. And I was called, I tell people here in Poland, I was called out of the priesthood into this work. That's the only way they'll listen to me, because it's a Catholic country, and they get very upset when they found out I left the ministry. They'll say, why did you leave the ministry? And I'll say, well, let's wait till this is over, and then we'll have that conversation. But basically, I was invited to participate in the creation of the LEOS Master of Arts in Applied Behavioral Science program in 1972 at Whitworth College. So I was just in the ground floor. It was one of the first competency-based grad programs in applied behavioral science, and OD was a big part of that. So, and the fact that I was born when I was born, as you'll see, has helped me a lot. I hardly ever talk about OD. When I came to Poland and Eastern Europe in 2007, 2008, I found out that OD was kind of like a buzzword, and I started, referring to myself as an OD consultant. Before that, and since then, and I still say that OD, I tell people, what do you do? System-wide, high engagement, performance improvement. That we want to engage. Like if somebody says, "Can you help my team?" I mean, absolutely. Then I'm thinking, how big a circle can I get the client to draw around that team? Who are the groups that you get input from? Who are the groups that you send stuff to? What's happening around the team? Because I want to get my arms around as much of the system as possible, and always use high engagement. That's where Kurt Lewin was absolutely. I don't care whether you do dialogic OD or AI or anything. The high engagement is like gravity. I think it's a built-in part of what we do. And why? It has to be connected to the business reasons or the mission of the organization. It can be a ballet troupe, that's fine. But it has to be, people need to see the connection between what we're proposing with the improvement of the performance of the organization. Some OD people seem to think that we're there to help people feel good. I think feeling good is almost always unintended consequence, but it's not the focus of our work. So I'm going to jump in. Who was the first OD consultant? Okay, I'm thinking that back in the day when Karg, I'm going to say name him Karg, who was a Neanderthal, he and the Warriors went out to hunt a mastodon, and they came back and they lost a couple of guys out there. All the men were the primary hunters, and they sat around the campfire. What are we going to do? How can we do this better? We lost a couple of guys. Do we need longer spears? Do we need to each have 2 spears? They began to brainstorm, and I'm saying that was the first socio-technical intervention, Don. I'm calling it socio-tech. How are we going to kill these mastodon that better and not lose so many people? And then in the Egyptian world, the Nile flooded every year, and that's what kept people alive was the water from the Nile. And it meant that everybody had to collaborate all along the Nile. They had to build dikes a certain size with a certain strength. And so the Egyptian government created these, I would call them consulting engineers, who went all up and down the river to make sure that the walls that guiding the Nile were the same. So they were like expert consultants who gave their opinion to the city managers along the Nile. And then Moses and Jethro, as an old student of the Bible, there's a story about Moses goes on his way around to the promised land. He stops off to visit his father-in-law, who was named Jethro. And he said, I'm going to paraphrase here from the Hebrew. He says to his father-in-law, I'm wasted. I'm wiped out, man. I got people coming to me all day. I can't handle all this stuff that's going on. So Jethro says, well, why don't you take your best people and put them in charge of 100, and your next best people, put them in charge of the 10s. He creates the first hierarchical organization. So this is like, I call it the first large-scale organization redesign. This is how that happened. These are all elements that's still present in OD. And then I think the court jesters have to get a nod here. They were trying to find a way to speak truth to power and stay alive. They spoke the truth and hoped to stay alive. So they were trying to influence the way decisions making. It's all about decision making. And each one of these reflects an element of OD, it seems to me, that is still alive today, that goes back, centuries. So I think we have a family tree that we need to really, really appreciate. That it starts in the roots, which I just laid out the roots, but the applied behavioral sciences and OD really came into being, as you know, about in the 1930s and 40s, and the famous T group experience in Connecticut and so on. So this is the OD family tree, as I think. We have action research at the bottom. And I happened to be born at the right time in the right place. I was born in 1940. So by the time I was in my 20s and 30s and was beginning to get curious about what to do, I had the good fortune. I was in a Gestalt group. I was a Gestalt therapist. I was in a Gestalt group with Herb Shepard. And so I met Herb Shepard, and then I met Ron Lippett, who was Kurt Lewin's first graduate student. So I'm like, I tell people here, Kurt Lewin was Polish. He was born in Mogilno, Poland. And I went to the town, got a picture taken. I'm so excited to go to Mecca, And then he moved to Germany with his family to teach. And then when Hitler came to power, they were Jewish. They left. He lost his parents in the camps, but he came to Europe. And one of his first graduate students was Ron Lippett, this YMCA guy. And Ron Lippett was one of my first mentors. So I learned OD from Herb Shepard, Ron Lippett, Jack Sherwood, and these people, some of the very, very top people in the field. And plan change. Plan change was like, in fact, I have my library, Don. I have about 4 or 5 books that go back to the 1950s, and one of them is called Plan Change. Then you got survey guided development. Everybody uses surveys now, but from my point of view, they're wasted. HR gets the data, or some group of experts get the data why not do the same survey, but then let the people themselves engage the people in analyzing the data. But that's a whole nother thing, Steve, that we should probably talk about. Strategic planning, large scale change, team building. These are all elements. Leadership development, conflict utilization, coaching, appreciative inquiry, and then my contribution, work in the human spirit. So all of these and there are many more, but I just want to lay this out for us that are in the field, that there's lots of and it's not that one branch of the tree is any better than any other branch of the tree. We're all a part of that same tree. So this is what we learned from Kurt Lewin. No action without research, no research without action. And that's just, these are just like, for me, they're principles like gravity. I don't care if you go dialogic or whatever nuance you're working with. For me, these are like fundamental principles. We don't get to vote on these. Everything and everybody is connected. That's why the system is so important. Small groups. This is really important. Marv Weisbord is a dear friend of mine, and he's the one that did the research that found out that it was Ron Lippett who suggested to his mentor that the small group was an important element. Up to that point, Kurt Lewin thought that the group was really made up of individuals, and Ron was the one who said that there's another thing in the room called the group, and that group becomes the basic unit of change. I think that's really true. And get so much to talk about here. The people who give you the data own the data. Like when I do interviews or surveys or something, I take the point of view that they're giving me their truth. They're investing it. They would like to get a return on that investment, but it's their data. What can I do with that? What can I promise them? What's going to happen to what you tell me? This is left out of so many interventions. It's so crucial. If you want people to tell you the truth, let them know what you're going to do with their truth. How's it going to be treated? Who's going to do what with that data? Because they own it. And I really think that's a powerful principle. And once they realize that you have integrity about that, man, you can really do some stuff. And the people who do the work, they know what needs to be done. And finally, the break existing paradigms with the people who need to change. This is all just fundamental stuff. So a few people that had something to do with this. I'm going to go through this very quickly, but because I think I can send you a link to these slides, right, Steve, and people can look at these in their own time.
Yep.
But this is the whole thing about this. Another world going on than what we can see and hear underneath the psychodynamic. It's a crucial thing. Carl Jung, Archetypes, the Shadow, which I do a lot of work with my Gestalt stuff. Skinner, of course, with operant conditioning, which led to performance management. Like if you do this, people will do that, and so on. And then this is a really interesting woman, Mary Parker Follett. She was the first one to really look at the link between leadership and what happens in a group. Highly recommend that you look into that. She explored empowerment, conflict resolution, group theory. One of the very first people to do this. Erik Erikson, the stages of life. This whole concept that things are developing. it occurred to me years ago that life is not a photograph, it's a movie. And what we're looking at is the current frame of the movie. So you got to have hope. When this frame is not positive or not good, the next frame can be entirely different. In fact, it quite often is. Maslow, of course, with his hierarchy of needs, he said we should be studying healthy people, not sick people. Why do we focus on the psychopath? What are these? Well, what can we learn from well people about? And then, of course, Rogers with his the power of the relationship, and this is where AI go. Appreciative inquiry goes all the way back to Rogers. Eric Byrne, one of my heroes with Gestalt and transactional analysis, that we have a script, and then these are the big four, and I'm going to take a minute on each one. Frederick Taylor, Kurt Lewin, Wilfred Bion, Douglas McGregor. Frederick Taylor, Marv Weisberg has a great treatment of him. He gets a bad name. He was the guy that had the stopwatch to measure how people will do. But he was actually one of the first people to be concerned about how labor and management were getting along. He created matrix management. You should definitely do some more study about Taylor. A lot of stuff goes back to Taylor. Bion was doing group work after World War II, and he is one that really he's actually the Tavistock, the English version of OD goes back to him. That the group has an identity, and that people in the group are being affected by the group. They're not just sitting in a circle, but they're creating something. And there's work that needs to be done. And the way people avoid the work is by pairing, like fight, flight, pairing, or dependency, that kind of thing. And then one more story about him. He had a colleague who went down into the Yorkshire mine, came out a changed man. I know when Marv told me the story, we both got really emotional. In the old days, they had teams working in the mine, and then during World War II, they were doing. Everybody had one job, kind of like Frederick Taylor, and then during World War II, they just didn't have enough people, so they went back to the team approach. And this guy goes down in the mine, he sees this, and he comes out, he's like, hallelujah. So there's a whole breakthrough that was discovered, kind of created by this group of miners. These were not McKinsey or BCG or OD consultants. This is a bunch of guys trying to figure out how the heck can we do this, and they figured it out. And that became a whole new team approach to mining. Trist, these guys, and here's the Yorkshire mine story with those guys. Kurt Lewin, he says, we say Levin here. Douglas McGregor, theory X, theory Y. And then this is my working definition of OD, but I don't want to go there. So this is my action research.
John, go back.
Please.
It's okay. Go take your time. Go back to the definition.
Okay.
Share with us your definition and why it matters.
Okay, will do. I just don't want to
it's okay.
take
We're
all
fine.
the time
We're
here.
fine. We're fine.
Billy Albin and I, in our chapter, this was kind of my adaptation of this. For me, OD is the application. It's action. It's not theory, but it's founded on theory. But it's the application of action research methodology. There's a way of working. Look. It's a series of conversations for me. OD is a series of conversations. So who needs to be in the room? Whose voice needs to be in this room while we're talking about whatever it is we're talking about? And so the more experience you get, I will say to you that are just learning to do this, the more you do it, the more you'll realize sitting in a room, wait a minute, there's some people who need to be in this circle. And so next time you'll remember to invite them, or I will say, hey, can we pause for a second? Can somebody go down the hall and get this person from engineering to come in here? And it's really powerful what you can do, but it's the application of action research methodology, applied behavioral science principles, okay, and systems theory. So you need to learn some stuff. You need to learn about applied behavioral science. You need to learn about action research. You need to learn about systems theory. And my way I teach systems theory, I say, if you have a clothesline with a bunch of clothes on it, when you jerk the socks, the underwear jumps. It's like everything is connected. And this department over here, you make a change or do something over there, it's going to affect everybody. And so if you have a bunch of parts in a junkyard, a big pile of auto parts, that's not a system. As soon as you put those parts together and make a car, now you've got a system. So any change you make in any part of that system is going to have an effect on the whole car. So this is how that works. And what is all that about? It's the application of all of that to human organisms. It's not structural, it's not technology, it's human beings and the way they interact with one another individually in teams. And why? To increase the internal and the external effectiveness. So every organization has everybody in the system has customers. So every team has a customer, is facing a customer internally. They get some input, they do stuff with it, they turn around and they give it to somebody else. So once you start linking these units and you look at the inputs and the outputs, now you're starting to look at the system. So when somebody says, can you come and do some team building with us? Like I said, I go, absolutely, love to. I'd like to talk to people in the team, gather some data. And then I like to feed back to the team leader and say, by the way, who do you get your inputs from? Who's upstream from you? And who do you give what you do with your work? I'd like to suggest that you get a couple of people from those units to be a part of the team building. Now, when they don't want to do that, then I realize, okay, because I've done this before, Don. I don't know about you. I've done things that I didn't want to do, but I needed the revenue. I needed the money. I had a family to feed. I'll do a team building thing, but I'm not going to promise any impact on anything in the organization. You're going to have some people inside the team that are going to feel better, maybe make better decisions, but boy, it's a missed opportunity. So I like to get as much as possible, get the system, like Marv says, get the whole system represented in the room. So OD is doing all of that to increase the internal and external effectiveness of the organization. If what we're doing cannot be, it's not just that we know it's affecting, the people have to see the connection between this thing you're doing with them, all these meetings, and the effectiveness of the organization and its members. They need to realize they're getting something out of it. And they need to see, and the people at the top need to realize this is going to help us with our bottom line and our share price and whatever else they worry about. It has to be connected. I'm sorry, but they have to see the connection, especially in facilitating change, using processes that involve everyone that's affected. So that's kind of the way Billy and I put it together. This was my kind of final wording on it. Maybe during the conversation after, Steve, we can have a conversation about that. So that's really it for me. And then action research, you all know about action research. It's finding out what's happening.
I think what's important, if I would
please.
I'd offer that I don't know if even people that have been in the field for a long time, understand that the essence of OD is action research and why it is.
Absolutely.
And particularly action research sounds like research. It's like devoid of practicality, maybe devoid of potentially devoid of human beings, right? Devoid of being involved like in the organization with what it needs. And maybe even devoid of collaboration or engaging the voices. But what I offer to our students, and we were talking about this past weekend, is that the essence of OD is action research because it's done with the organization. Right?
Absolutely.
And if you do good action research with the organization, you're collaborating with them using evidence, and the intervention is the experiment, if you will.
Exactly.
And could you talk a little bit about that? Could you just speak a little bit to your thoughts?
I learned that from Ron Lippitt. I love that, Steve. Ron talked about it, also Herb Shepard, talked about doing experiments. I love going in and saying to people, like the big four consulting firms promise an output that they absolutely have no right to promise. And they put people through I'm being dramatic to make the point, but Don, this is why they only get 20-30% of their projects work, because they put people through a process and then they say, we've now changed everything. We've changed the system, but the people are just pretending they know what the right answer is. So they walk around and they say what they know they need to say so they can move on, get back to work and get on with their work. So nothing fundamentally really changes. So what Kurt figured out is if you do the research with the people and then engage them, see, quite often the big four will go in and they'll have an army of minions. That's how they get the billable hours. They have going around interviewing, gathering data, but then that data comes back to them. And then they're responsible for doing the research, doing the diagnosis, and then recommending the action. Now, I happen to think that a lot of their actions are absolutely on target. These are smart people. I mean, I've consulted alongside McKinsey, BCG, Anderson, all these firms. I mean, they quite often I've had the privilege of working with them, and I would say they've had the privilege of learning something about OD. But what happens is the data is in the hands of experts, and then they have to sell the recommendation. So they hand the client, these are 20 things you should do, and I believe they're all absolutely right 90% of the time, and they never happen. Because the system wasn't effective. I'm an old family systems therapist. So let's say I work with the family and I think of 3 things they need to do. And I go, here's 3 things you need to do. Thank you very much. It's been nice working with you. What are the odds that that family that those recommendations go into the system that up to then was unable to do anything that it needed to do? So our work has to impact the decision-making process, the trust, the respect, the truth telling that's going on, what it is that what's the quality of the currency that's being worked with in that system. If we can't affect that, we're just gonna do more. So that's why Kurt's process is that's why action research is so powerful, because the people themselves get in the room. I'm involved right now. I just literally this morning was in a conversation with a guy who, he wants to do the smart city thing. He's asked me, so we're about to do an intervention with a series of small towns in Poland on getting representatives from like law enforcement, education. It's like a future search conference. Sandra Janoff and Mark Weisford, and we're going to get all those people together, and they're going to be forming action teams and going out and doing stuff. So we're going to have people in that process who are just off the people on the street. If we're going to work on homelessness, we got to have some homeless people then, you know what I'm saying? So it's like we're working with people who represent all the issues that these towns have to work with. And we're going to get them all those issues out on the table where they're seen and discussed by those very same people in a safe environment. That's the diagnosis part. And then the implications of that are going to be worked on by small groups from that group who have been empowered to take action or to recommend action to the. Now, one quick thing before we go on. One thing that we can almost always guarantee in an OD intervention is that creative thinking is going to come out of the end of this thing. The question, I've had, I think, 4 or 5 failures in my life. And, Billy and I talked about this a lot. I think we learn more from our failures sometimes than anything. And each of them, in one way or another, I did not do an adequate job of preparing the middle managers. Here in Eastern Europe, all of the executives know we got to innovate, we got to change, we got to step up the pace. All the young people at the bottom are going, yeah, what are we waiting for? It's the middle. The people in the middle are the guardians of the old way of doing things. So that's where the work is. And where I failed over the years, not just in Eastern, I had one failure here in Eastern Europe, but before is I was unable, Don, you mentioned it too. The company didn't want to pay me to do work with the middle. They said, we know, thank you for this process. It's been lovely. We'll take it from here. And it just plopped because the middle of the organization just said, thank you, that's lovely. We're going to keep on, doing what we're doing. So it's very important that the transformation happen in the decision-making group in parallel with your magical thinking. Otherwise, these ideas are going to drop into an ancient decision-making matrix, and it's not going to happen. Well, Steve, I think I should probably stop him. I've been going now 22 minutes, so let's call it good.
Okay, I think this has been great. I hope I would suspect if we can spotlight everybody. So if you could, at least if you can bring everybody in, the whole team, and unspotlight, we can all see each other as one big screen. So yeah, there we go. Yeah. So Hey, for all of you out there that video's on, and if you don't, you can turn your video on just to say hi. But I just think, how many people have a thumbs up for all this really great stuff that we've been hearing?
No
It's
pressure.
it's
No
it's really
pressure.
awesome. It's awesome. Awesome. You know, it's just wonderful to get us connected into it, the essence and the practicality and the simplicity of the field. It's complicated because human beings are complicated, you know, but how we approach it, it's simple. And if we stay true to the simple principles, the complicated part can take care of itself. And it's rooted in the wisdom that's in the system. And it's trusting that. And it's engaging that in efficient ways. And so that's really what's important. And that's no small feat. So before we go to the breakout, I would just ask the two of you, how do you engage people in a change process in a way that they are a part of it, knowing that sometimes it's challenging to take the time necessary to engage them in designing the intervention and actually implementing the intervention? How do you address this challenge of bringing people in?
You want to go, Don? You're senior to me by 6 months, so you go.
Well, you know what I would say? I'm focusing a lot more on training and developing leaders before I do anything.
It's just where I was
Because,
going to go. Yeah, sorry.
okay, yeah, I figured, John. But um, you know, you can work with individuals, and there are all kinds of ways you can create open dialogue and that sort of thing. But unless the leaders embrace it, it's not going to go anywhere. So I guess what I would say, I actually start with the leaders, then I can work with everybody else.
We have an expression in the military. I spent 4 years as a combat officer on a U.S. Navy destroyer, and the concept was when we going into battle, so to speak, we need to have what's called top cover. We need somebody above everything, an admiral or somebody who has the whole picture, who believes in the mission and who can send resources. And the most successful projects that I've had, mergers and reorgs and stuff like that, when I look back over why they worked on, it was that the executive team in all the cases were graduates of our 4-day leadership intensive, which is about personal transformation in the presence of your colleagues. So there's a kind of a deepening of that happens at the top. And so after that, and this sounds really stupid, but a measure is, if I call the CEO, will he or she take my call? You understand what I'm saying? And if they'll take my call, then I know that it's going to be hard for anybody lower in the organization to just fold, to be against it or And I have this whole thing with resistance as my Gestalt training. It's resistance. It's just people that value something else. So I like to get resistors in the diagonal slice group that we use in our OD project, because I know they're going to end up trusting the process. And I tell them when I invite them, they'll say, I don't believe in this. I say, exactly. That's why I want you on this thing. You represent a constituency out there. So the two things to me are, the leadership has to be 110% sponsoring this thing, and we have to have resistors inside the tent who bring the reasons they're resistant, and those reasons have to be taken into account because they represent some truth out there in the organization. So those are the two things that I would say.
And I think the nuance that may not be picked up on is that it's the leadership is supporting the basic principles of organization development and change. So it's not leaders who support doing change. Like they can say, I support this change. I want to do this change. And they can be very directive about it or dictatorial about it and just tell people to go to get it done. What I think you're saying is that when you're working on system level change, whoever's in charge of the system you're working on, if they value and understand that they're supporting a more collaborative, engaged approach to change, and if they understand what that means and the implications of that, then you have the likelihood that the change will work. Yet you have to somehow get them up to speed on what that means. I think that goes back to Don's point about leadership training, and you talk about people that participated in your process. So I want to get the people to talk to each other real quick. So we're going to do a quick breakout just for 5 minutes and have you all just talk about what you heard, what your reactions are, and what questions you have, and come bring back some questions. And so we've got a few groups here. I'm going to open up the rooms, go and meet and say hi, and just say, hey, what did we hear? What's popping up that I heard? What are my reactions to what I heard? And what's a question we want to bring back? 1 to 3 questions. We'll have time for that. And we'll just take 5 minutes for the breakout. I'll open all the rooms, and then we'll come back and we'll open it all up for all of us. No, yeah. Let's see here. So the rooms should be open. Are they open? Yeah. So you can go ahead on to your room. All right. So we got to get 2 more people. So Joseph and Charles, are you able to go to your room? Just check.
Joseph, oh my gosh, there you are.
So I'm not sure. Joe, if you can click the go to or unmute to let us know. All right. So all right.
He's in India, halfway around the world, you know.
Oh, wow. All right, I'll bring him back here in a few minutes. So yeah, so what I was saying is it's really interesting. And I think asking this question is it's hard to figure out how to ask the question. And Joseph, do you have your room? You have let's see here, where's Joseph to go to?
Maybe those guys can be in a room, Lisa.
They do. They are assigned. I just might have to move them to get them to
they're there. So they're there.
Yeah, they are there. I'm just gonna move them to try to get to ask them.
I put them in the waiting room. I don't want to delay from our recording. So
or Lisa, I wish
the waiting room or whatever.
Got it.
So
Lisa, I wish I had you on all my projects.
Yeah. So the focus here, I want to focus on our conversation and what you all are saying. So what I think is, and I'm curious what you all think about each other's talk, but this notion of, you talked about you have to work with leaders. And so is that the top leader of the whole organization, or is it the leader of the department, or is it the leader of the team?
Well,
like whatever, right? First,
I would say whoever has sufficient rank. It doesn't have to be
the system
admiral,
that you're working in, right? Because a lot of people say, I can't I can't influence my whole organization, but what can you influence? And then
exactly.
The thing though, that the thing,
like I said, draw the biggest circle you can, Steve.
Yeah. Well,
I like to get how big a circle can I get them to give me permission to play
to influence, right? But getting people to embrace od&c values and principles. That's the real challenge. How do you, in a consulting project, when you walk in,
let me tell you what.
How do you help them to do that so they're willing to give the processes a try?
There's 2 things that have to happen.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, we got some lag here.
Okay.
It's not my job to get those people into the room with me. That's their direct boss's job. It's whoever the sponsors are of the people that are involved in, let's say, our stuff. It's management's job to get the people in the room with me. Then once it's not my job. I'm going to try to make it interesting and make it look interesting, but ultimately it's a management function to get the people into the process that we're going to do. And once we get them, then we do really great stuff with them. But when if management is reluctant to take their people out of their work, their job, and put them in these meetings, we're done. That's why, like you say, Don, leadership is absolutely essential. Then what has to roll down through the organization is not just our process, but sponsorship of the process. That's just what I would say.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's so fun to listen to John. John, you are so articulate in expressing ideas and making them clear. That was so much fun. But I agree with John. Usually about all you can focus on is the leadership wherever you've been given the option to work. But eventually, I always tell my students, you have the ideal and then the real. So
Right.
the ideal is that you get people engaged at the top and then throughout the organization.
Yeah.
That's not always possible. So you focus on the real, but you
Yeah.
always have in mind the ideal. So
Yeah.
if it's, somebody at this level, you're always thinking, but what would open a door to go higher? Because the reality is, if you're really trying to make organization change, you got to reach the people at the top.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the failures that I've had, just to give you a quick war story, we were invited in, a company in Poland saturated the market. They decided to go international, decided to buy a company in the Czech Republic. One of the board members was the former CEO of a company where I'd done a merger. And he told the CEO, you need to call this guy, John Scherer, to be a part of this process. So we came in, and I remember doing a presentation for the management board, C-level people. They had no interest in this at all. And the CEO had no interest in it at all. And so we ended up going through the motions for a few months. And then I just said, thank you, but I'm leaving. You know, like the fox said to the skunk, I'm sorry, sweetheart, but I've enjoyed as much of this as I can stand. And so we just said thank you and left. But I consider that a failure on my part. And then you know what happened to Steve and Don? A month after we started the process, the CEO quit. He quit. He just walked out one day. I literally walked out, walked away. And so it's like, boy, this is some dysfunction. This is a huge company. I can't say the name of it because their stock market thing, NDA and all that. But I'm telling you, that was a shock, and I got taken by surprise by that. And that's not a good thing when you're working at the top. This was an acquisition, right? And the reason they always fail is all the effort goes into the acquisition and no attention goes into the merger. It was changing the chart, changing the heart. I've been preaching that ever since I came to Eastern Europe. And when the executives get that, changing the chart's the easy part. Changing the heart. You got these two companies that have been fighting on Friday. Yeah, exactly. They've been fighting on Friday. On Monday, you want them to be hugging each other and collaborating. You got to put some kind of training, as you say, Don. You got to put them in the room with some kind of help to make that happen. Otherwise, it could take years, like a lot of mergers of airlines and stuff like that. Those people still hate each other.
So what are you two curious about at this stage with what you know and what you've seen as you listen to each other? Do you have a big question that you're exploring right now or that you wonder about?
I think with all the technology that's involved in today's times, some of us who have been around for a long time might be rendered obsolete. I mean, I see you, Steve, you're really good at technology. Like you set up, this is a great virtual meeting because you set up all these group rooms just like you could, if you were there in person and everyone was together. You're really good at this. And I don't know about John, but I'm really behind in a lot of technology. As Steve knows, John, he knows my wonderful wife, Anna. And she's the secret behind anything that I might do well. And she has a lot of health problems. And frankly, a lot of people are concerned for her health, not just for her, but they know if she passed away, I'd be obsolete.
If something happens to her, you're going to turn into an idiot.
Yeah.
So we were just talking as you all are coming back about what questions they're curious about. But I love the point that you made around you change the chart, change the heart. John, what could you share a little bit about that?
Well, years ago when I was involved in some merger M&As, it occurred to me that the reason that such a high percentage of them fail is all the attention went into to the acquisition. And not enough or no attention was paid to the M, to the merging of the cultures and essentially the DNA. You have these two DNAs, and this part, the hard stuff's relatively easy. It's the soft stuff that's really hard. So we call it the harder stuff. So the changing the chart and then changing the heart. How do you change the hearts, the DNA to be open? Do you blend? And I don't think there's ever been a blending. It's always an acquisition. The big one always eats the little one. And so how do you, I've done probably 10 or 15 M&As over my career, and I've never seen a real merger. It's always an acquisition. And so changing the heart, put some attention into the heart that's going on. That's the best you can do, is I like to ask the buying company, the one that's taking over, how it's real simple. It's like the golden rule. How would you like to be treated? And many of them have been treated. Many of them have been on the other end of an M&A. So sometimes I can get a board to, brainstorm on a piece of paper when this is over. How do you want those people in that little company that you're about to buy? How fast do you want them to be on board and excited about working with you? Make it really operational like that.
Gotcha.
Steve,
ahead, Don.
I also, one thing I forgot to mention about what we're learning about change is that you need to change the heart and the mind. And John Cotter from Harvard wrote a book I use actually with my OD class called The Heart of Change. And what he's saying is that in OD, we have all kinds of ways to gather data, present it back, and all that sort of thing. That appeals to the mind. But if you can't appeal to the heart, then you probably aren't going to win people over. So in other words, you need to think about both. And in one of my case books, I have a case about a person named Vicky Colbert, who basically changed the whole education system in Colombia. And she got the attention of the leaders by bringing in a bunch of kind of peasant people she'd been working with in rural Colombia. And they had worked together to create a plan for changing education for all the rural areas of Colombia. And when these leaders, saw these people and heard their pleas and their circumstances, that did it. And so she was able to change education in the whole country. And then she started doing this around the world. But she was really good at not just giving data, because there was a lot of data about how poor the education in rural Colombia was. But she had to appeal to the heart to really get them to buy into this.
Yeah, I've heard
Don, could you talk
teachers,
about? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Well,
I
just want to hear from.
I wanted to ask Don to do one thing. I'm sorry. Yeah, there's a little lag. And so I want to get whoever's got a question, please raise a question. But Don, I wanted you to speak to the real versus the ideal. And if you want to ask a question, just do a thumbs up or raise your hand if you have a question to ask. I'd love to know who has a question. But could you speak, Don, just briefly before someone asks, this notion of real versus ideal?
I think it's very important in OD to really understand what OD is and the purpose, improve health and effectiveness. That's the big picture. So I think in everything we do, whether we're working with an individual, a group, a whole organization, we always start with the ideal in mind and then work with the real. So I may be working with an individual, but I'm hoping eventually, the ideal is that I reach at this level, and so on. So that's always in my thinking. Got to deal with the real, but you always have the ideal as your goal.
Gotcha. Thanks, Don. Hey, Dave, you have a question?
Well, first, I want to say that this is like my life flashing before me to see the presentations since it's sort of my intellectual life that each of these names have influenced. Heather and I had a question, but let me ask a bigger one that I think is bigger anyway, not to put Heather down, but John, if you were to now make the chart for all the people who appear at this moment to become the next of any of these great thinkers you've noticed, any names come to view? Or Don, anyone out there, maybe a hell of a lot younger than us,
by the way,
who are really moving, continuing to make the motions that get all the attention necessary to have the field change. So who's moving the field? Other than Steve Cady.
Yeah, well, actually, and by the way, it's great to see you.
Thank you.
You're one of those persons that's always learning and growing.
I think you need to go, Don.
Pardon me?
He was telling me how smart I
I see
am.
you need to go because I'm out of it. I'm over here in Eastern Europe, so I think you need to be the one to respond.
Oh, okay,
to that
I got it.
question.
So I certainly think of Steve Cady. I mean, he is a mover and shaker in the field, and I've loved my association with him because of that. And he's one of these persons who integrates the old with the new. And so he would be one of them. There are certainly more females that are rising in the field. I think of Jackie Stavros, the co-author of your book, Steve, Teresa Yeager, and
Amy Edmondson, and even though she's been around for a while, she's definitely in the new generation of work, and then Brene Brown, who's sort of tangentially related to the field, and so others that are doing some of that too.
But Amy, some of these people aren't official OD people like Amy Edmondson, John Cotter, and so on, but there's a lot of overlap in what they do with OD, and she's having a tremendous impact with her psychological safety concept, because in today's fast-moving times, if you don't have psychological safety up at the top, you're going to make a lot of bad decisions because things are moving so quickly. And if you're out of touch with what's going on around you, you're in great jeopardy. So, there are some newcomers that are doing better things. I think the part of the problem is getting their ideas out, because to get ahead in academia, you got to publish in high-tier journals.
Yes.
That means they're so academic that nobody reads them.
Unfortunately, that may be true at a very bad time for that to happen, by the way.
Yeah.
Because the people you mentioned and people I've come across through my podcast and people who had graduated by the great programs, they need to be able to be heard. And yes, we have social media, but it has to be compacted in a way that has the effect that, let's say, Lewin had. In other words, it was a ripple effect. Lewin did his thing, but then people were so moved by it that it rippled out. So I'm hopeful that if this session were run 10 years from now, there'd be more names on your overhead.
Yeah, Nick, another problem too is that you get what you reward, value, and measure. And if you're in academia today, the rewards are all about publishing in top-tier journals. They're not about consulting, practicing your craft, and so on. So part of the problem is the younger people that are coming in to the focus, first of all, don't always know a lot about the history of OD. But more than that, it's hard for them to get out there and practice because there's not a big reward for that. And that's where you really learn. You can only study so much. It's what you actually try and experience that really makes the difference.
Yeah. Don, there's a couple of questions. Don and John, there's a couple of questions that are in the chat. And so, Nick, I can read it, or if you can come in and ask your question, that'd be great.
Sure. I work in K-12 education, and a lot of change initiatives are directed from our state capital or from legislators, and districts often have to kind of respond to the law versus taking a more proactive approach. And I guess I was just curious to know how addressing each of those two scenarios might be different when supporting, in this case, a school or a district through that changing process.
Yeah, but I'll just respond quickly. Actually, my I think it was my first book was about change in the public sector, and it is harder. There are layers of bureaucracy that are really hard to break through. But I would go back to you start with the ideal and then you go to the real. And so you can make changes in the public sector, but you got to be realistic about what you can and can't do. By the way, I see Dave Jameson. He could probably answer these questions. He has more experience than John and I put together.
Yeah. It's really
It's like
good to
doing
see.
magic for David Copperfield.
Yeah. Well, it's great to see everybody here. It's time for us to say goodbye. We're at the middle of the hour, and you all have been great. We're going to meet again next week. You all will get to hear from Dave. Dave is going to be featured in one of our future sessions. Yeah, John.
Well, I just wanted to respond to Nick quickly, but that's okay. We'll move on.
Please.
And also in the chat box, I put a link to a talk that I gave at ODN Europe, which has my slides, and it's different, but it's about the history. It's like basically how I got into OD, and it's a way of showing the history of OD. And I would just say to Nick, basically, Herb Shepard taught me how to get a few people in a room who agree with you and start planning, and then gradually add people to the conversation. I mean, and then keep your OD principles in the back of your mind. How can we engage more and more of the people, and who do we need to have in this conversation? And maybe you can achieve critical mass that way if you can't go through official channels.
Thanks to the both of you for your advice and your feedback. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Well, this
Good luck.
Yeah.
And you might want to look into the book by Richard Schmuck, old friend, on OD in schools, action research in school. Dick Schmuck and his wife, SCHMUCK.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank
Wonderful day. Excellent. More every Thursday for next few months. Next 3 months, I think we're going to have a lot of great people here. Same time. Make sure you sign up. If you have any questions, just let me know offline if you need any help with that. And again, thank you to Lisa. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, John. Thank you, Don. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Have a great day. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.
Hey, John and Steve, are you all going to stay on for a while?
Yep, I will. Looks like Steve had to go to the bathroom, but Lisa's here.